The 1970s was, well, a decade I can't vouch for. I wasn't around, but here's what I know. Disco, gas lines, the steel curtain, the big red machine, Vietnam, The Godfather, Jaws, and I am not a crook. I also know that roller coasters had a rebirth in the 1970s, and people at the beginning of the decade couldn't even imagine the kinds of coasters being built by the end of it. Some of these coasters are almost 50 years old, and some of them are no longer with us. Once again, let's add some music into the mix. The 70s were a decade of disco, for sure, but also some of the most iconic music of all time. Today, let's count down my top 15 70s songs, along with the best coasters of the decade. Number 15. Live and Let Die by Paul McCartney and Wings, 1975, and the Schwarzkopf Speed Racers, 1971 to 1976. This model started with Big Bend at Six Flags Over Texas, then Zambezi Zinger at Worlds of Fun, and then the Two Wizards, both at the Great America parks. The only one left in America is at Six Flags Great America, Zambezi Zinger still operating at a park in Colombia. These are not all the same. They are similar, but not clones. Big Bend was the tallest and fastest, but the Wizards are the longest. These have bobsled-style trains, just a seatbelt as a restraint, a spiral lift hill, and a very mild course of shallow drops and big sweeping turns. Speed Racer is a good name for this model. It's meant to showcase speed. It's one of the best family-friendly coasters out there. Number 14. Have You Ever Seen the Rain by Creedence Clearwater Revival, 1971, and Super Duper Looper at Hershey Park, 1978. As looping coasters became popular over the last 2 years, Hershey Park got their hands on a great custom model. Rising up 75 feet, this drops right into its big circular loop, but the ride has so much more to offer. It winds down the rest of the course, all around the hollow section of the park, back through its loop, all done with a lap bar. It's a very mild ride. Sometimes you get that with Schwarzkopf. Other times it tries to rip your head off, and you'll see that all over this list. On the East Coast, this was a lot of people's first looping coaster, and it's a classic. Number 13. My Life by Billy Joel, 1978, and Revolution at Six Flags Magic Mountain, 1976. Before Super Duper Looper, there was Revolution. These are almost sister coasters, just on opposite coasts. Revolution debuted in 1976 as the first modern coaster with a loop, and for that, it gets all the accolades. It wasn't the first coaster to go upside down. That opened the year before, just 60 miles down the 5 freeway at Knott's Berry Farm. And just a week after this opened, Corkscrew opened at Cedar Point and had that loop and 2 other corkscrews. Revolution still holds up today because of its layout. It rides alongside the mountain, covering almost 3,500 feet of track, going into big swooping drops before finally setting up for its one dramatic moment, the shallow drop into the famous loop. It's a very mild ride, a perfect coaster for riders to experience their first loop. And with brand new trains with just lap bars, this looks to be safe at Magic Mountain for years to come. Number 12. I Want to Be Sedated by the Ramones, 1978, and Great American Scream Machine at Six Flags Over Georgia, 1973. This park opened in 1967 but didn't have a major coaster until 1973. This is when PTC built a big wooden coaster alongside the lake in the back of the park. 105 feet tall, an 89-foot drop, 57 miles per hour, 3,450 feet of track, sprawling over an L-shaped layout. I first rode this in 2018 and it was one of the most ungodly rough things that I've ever experienced. But through it all, I could see how good the ride was. Good pacing, good airtime, a long layout for sure, and I can only imagine how great it was when it was brand new. I heard that recently it got retracked, and I'll have to get back on it. It's been 4 years now, and it's about time to give it another shot. Number 11. Baba O'Reilly by The Who, 1971, and Texas Cyclone at Six Flags Astroworld, 1976. Here you go, the first defunct coaster on my list. I know some of the speed racers are also defunct, and you'll see some other dead clones later on this list, but you can still ride that model elsewhere. This is a replica of the Coney Island Cyclone, and it's the only one of those on this list. Right when Six Flags took over, they did a great thing for this park. This was their first big thrill coaster, 8 years after the park opened, and right away, it shot to the top of everyone's top 10 list. 93 feet tall, 80-foot drop, almost 3,200 feet of track. The park's original plan was to buy the original Cyclone and move it here, the coaster being in danger of being shut down just a couple years prior, but that idea was too expensive. A replica was a much better option, and this lasted all the way until the park closed in 2005. Number 10. Mr. Blue Sky by ELO, 1978, and the Taft Racing Wooden Coasters, 1972 to 1976. This all started with Kings Island's Racer in 1972, launching the park that launched a whole chain of parks owned by Taft Broadcasting. King's Dominion would follow in 1975, pretty much a carbon copy of the Kings Island model, their racing wooden coaster called Rebel Yell, now Racer 75. Then they bought Carowinds and gave it the same thing in 1976, Thunder Road. You can even throw in Great Adventures Rolling Thunder, even though it wasn't part of the Taft chain. That opened in 1979, and it was in the same vein as the others. These are great classic out-and-back wooden coasters, and of the ones I've ridden, the original is still the best. Kings Island is taking care of the racer, and it's still a smooth ride with good airtime. Number 9. Midnight Train to Georgia by Gladys Knight and the Pips, 1973, and the Aero Shuttle Loops, 1977 and 1979. We go right back to Kings Island to start this trend. Screamin' Demon was the first one to open in 1977, with another at Circus World Showcase and Riverside Amusement Park the same year. Those parks later renamed Boardwalk and Baseball and Six Flags New England. This caught on, the 70s rounding out with an interlocking set at Six Flags Great Adventure, these known as Lightning Loops, as well as Blackpool Pleasure Beach and Tokyo Dome City. These use an electric winch launch to push a train off a 56-foot platform into a loop, up another platform, and the process repeats, just backwards. These are simple but extreme rides, and only 3 can still be found today. One at Frontier City in Oklahoma. That used to be one side of Lightning Loops. Another at Elitch Gardens in Colorado, and the one I mentioned at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. If you have never ridden one and live near one of these places, get your rides while you still can. Number 8. Tiny Dancer by Elton John, 1972, and the Schwarzkopf Shuttle Loops, 1977 to 1979. Just like with the Aero Shuttle Loops, 3 of the Schwarzkopf ones opened in 1977. 2 of them were from Taft, King Cobra at King's Dominion and White Lightning at Carowinds. The other was from the new Marriott Park in Santa Clara, California, Tidal Wave. This was followed by Marriott's other park in 1978, along with Astroworld and Knott's Berry Farm, and finally, Yokohama Dreamland. These are similar to the Aero models, just with a different shape. The launch was a lot more intense, whether it be with a weight drop or a flywheel, staying at ground level and rising up a forward and backward spike, not requiring 2 launches to do so, and the train going through that station to get to the back spike. There are 6 of these still out there, the only one in America being Montezuma's Revenge, currently undergoing a major overhaul to keep it alive. Number 7. Let It Be by the Beatles, 1970, and Space Mountain at Magic Kingdom, 1975. 4 years after Disney World opened, Disney stumbled on a goldmine. This indoor coaster themed to space travel has become an icon for the Disney parks, and it all started with this one in 1975. It has 2 tracks, Alpha and Omega, both just under 3,200 feet long, stands inside the building at 90 feet tall, and only hits 27 miles an hour as it winds down the course. You can't see anything inside the building, just the stars on the roof, and it makes it seem like it's flying. Riders sit single file on this one, just 6 riders per train, and it's pure fun. Number 6. Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting by Elton John, 1973, and Big Thunder Mountain Railroad at Disneyland, 1979. If Space Mountain wasn't a big enough winner, 4 years later, they came up with Big Thunder Mountain at Disneyland, this being an outdoor coaster built into a fake mountain, a dynamic attraction mine train. With 3 lift hills, this has 3 distinct sections covering almost 2,700 feet of track, going in and out of the mountain, surprisingly intense for a Disney coaster, and like Space Mountain, just pure fun. This was so popular, it was replicated at 3 other Disney parks. Number 5. December 1963, Oh What a Night by Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, 1975, and Riddler Mindbender at Six Flags Over Georgia, 1978. Schwarzkopf strikes again, and where Super Duper Looper and Revolution were on the mild side, they ramped up the intensity with Mindbender. This is built on top of a hill and dives all the way down, starting with an 80-foot drop into the first loop, all up near the station. Then down the hill it goes, big drops and one final loop before it climbs up the hill in the right ends. With over 3,200 feet of track, this is one of the most interesting layouts on the list. Some people would have it higher, but I wasn't as impressed with the forces. In 2021, its original trains were replaced by shorter trains designed by B&M, and although they are a downgrade, they still have just a lap bar, which is awesome. Number 4. Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen, 1975, and Shockwave at Six Flags Over Texas, 1978. Six Flags bought 2 of these double looping Schwarzkopfs for their parks in 1978, so it makes sense this one is always being compared to Mindbender. This one is built on a flat plot of land, but where Mindbender is lacking in force, Shockwave has all of it. This is mainly in the first half, starting with a 116-foot drop and then 2 loops, back to back. By the end of the second one, I always gray out, but you gotta snap out of that, because the next 2 drops are full of ejector airtime. The end of the ride could be better. It meanders around before the final breaks, but the first half more than makes up for it. Number 3. Walk This Way by Aerosmith, 1975, and Gemini at Cedar Point, 1978. Opening as one of the biggest coasters in the world, when everyone was getting a big dueling wooden coaster, there was Gemini standing as a hybrid. This is best described as a mine train on steroids, a support structure made of wood and a steel track. This makes for a smooth ride, full of drops of all sizes and drawn-out turns. Great airtime. The train's racing over about 4,000 feet of track, maxing out at 60 miles per hour, ending with an upward helix into the final brakes. This is still some of the most fun you can have at Cedar Point. Number 2. Hotel California by the Eagles, 1977, and Colossus at Six Flags Magic Mountain, 1978. At the same time Gemini was opening its gates, Magic Mountain was opening an icon of their own. The tallest and fastest wooden coaster in the world. It stood 125 feet, hit 62 miles per hour, and its 2 tracks covered over 4,300 feet. This was the first wooden coaster to have 2 drops over 100 feet, a great double out and back layout. When this opened, it was a lot more extreme than it turned out to be. Apparently, it had too much airtime, so after its first year, a lot of it was reprofiled, its double down lasting until 1991. I didn't ride this until 2000, but I still loved it. One of my favorites in the park. But don't get me wrong, when the park shut it down in 2014 so RMC could turn it into Twisted Colossus, I wasn't complaining. RMC made it into the most popular ride in the park once again, and one of my overall top 10 coasters. Number 1. Won't Get Fooled Again by The Who, 1971, and The Beast at Kings Island, 1979. There's nothing quite like The Beast. I want to say, back in 1979, this must have seemed like an impossible project. But even today, 44 years later, if this was to open, I don't think people would believe it. 7,361 feet of track, still the world's longest wooden coaster, and a record I think it'll hold forever. A 141-foot drop into a tunnel, almost 65 miles per hour, a second lift that drops the train into the ride's signature moment, the final helix inside the tunnel. It may not be the most extreme ride, but it's a marathon. Over 4 minutes from start to finish. Iconic on its own, but a legend at night. And I think it deserves the top spot of the 70s, just barely sneaking in 1979. That's a wrap on the best coasters and my favorite songs of the 70s. Let me know what you think of my picks, and what's your favorite coaster and song of the decade. Before you go, don't forget to drop a like, and if you're new here and want to see more content like this, please give me a sub. Also, check out my links below for my Discord server, and my second channel where I post copyright-free off-ride footage, and my baseball channel if you also happen to love baseball. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.